What if the loudest cry for help comes from the person no one ever suspected? What if a single act, done in fear, not hatred, could split an entire town and open the door to a miracle? Stay to the end, because nothing in Maple Creek, Indiana, would ever be the same after what happened that summer afternoon. The day began like any other in Evergreen Park. The sky was a soft Midwestern blue, stretched wide and peaceful above the towering oak trees. Families lounged on picnic blankets. Elderly couples scattered crumbs for sparrows. Joggers passed through beams of warm sunlight that shimmered like golden dust. It was the kind of afternoon people compared to postcards, quiet, gentle, untouched. And then she arrived. A teenage girl walked down the stone path, each step stiff and deliberate, as if she were fighting a storm no one else could see. Her name was Hannah Miller, though no one in the park realized at first who she was, the only daughter of Pastor Daniel Miller, the most respected Protestant leader in the region. Her blonde hair clung to her temples in the heat. Her fingers tightened around the strap of a worn gray backpack. Inside that backpack was a single object that would change Maple Creek forever. People barely noticed her as she crossed the grass toward the small clearing at the center of the park. That clearing had become a quiet sanctuary ever since St. Bridget's Parish installed the new Virgin Mary statue just 3 weeks earlier. Carved from white Portuguese marble, it stood beneath a sprawling oak whose branches had survived since the Civil War. On sunny days, the light fell across Mary's folded hands like a blessing. Today, that piece was about to shatter. A soft metallic clink broke the stillness as Hannah set her backpack on the ground. A jogger slowed, confused. A child tugged on his mother's sleeve. And then Hannah pulled out the can of bright red paint. For one breathless moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire park inhaled at the same time, watching, waiting, not yet believing. Hannah's hands trembled violently as she pried open the lid. The sharp chemical smell burst into the warm air. The color of the paint shimmered like fresh blood in the sunlight. Her eyes, wide, confused, frantic, locked onto the statue with something deeper than anger, something closer to fear. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" The voice came from a bench nearby. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, an elderly Catholic woman who prayed her rosary there every afternoon, stood up shakily. Her hand hovered over her chest. Hannah didn't answer. Or perhaps she couldn't. In one sudden, desperate motion, she lifted the can and hurled it forward. The sound echoed, a violent splash like a wave hitting stone. Gasps erupted across the clearing. A mother grabbed her children. A jogger stumbled backward. Mrs. Delgado covered her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Thick red paint exploded across the face of the Virgin Mary. It streamed down the marble cheeks, the folded hands, the flowing robe, dripping in jagged streaks that looked horrifyingly like wounds. The once serene expression of Mary was now drowned in crimson. For a heartbeat, Hannah just stared, frozen, pale, breath shaking, as if only now realizing what she had done. Then the shouting began. Phones were raised. Someone cried, "Is that Pastor Miller's daughter?" And somewhere beyond the trees, a siren wailed, a thin, distant warning of the storm about to engulf the town. Hannah turned and ran. Behind her, the statue of Virgin Mary stood drenched in red, glowing with the last of the afternoon sun, like a silent witness to a tragedy no one yet understood. And by nightfall, the peaceful town of Maple Creek would become a battleground of fear, faith, judgment, and a miracle none of them saw coming. Long before the red paint stained the marble, long before Hannah Miller's trembling hands lifted that can in the middle of Evergreen Park, something else had already been brewing beneath the polite smiles of Maple Creek, Indiana. The town looked peaceful from the outside. Sunday barbecues, Little League games, neighbors waving from porches. But beneath the surface ran a thin, tight fault line that had gone undisturbed for decades. At the heart of that fault line were two congregations. On the west side of town stood Maple Creek Fellowship, a proud Protestant church led by Pastor Daniel Miller, a man whose sermons were known for their warmth and clarity. Families who had been there for generations filled its pews each Sunday. They admired Daniel, trusted him, and in some ways placed him on a pedestal no pastor wanted to stand on. A mile east, tucked beside an old stone cemetery, was St. Bridget's Catholic Parish, shepherded by Father Antonio Ruiz, a gentle priest from New Mexico whose calm demeanor could soothe even the most anxious soul. His parish was smaller, but growing. Young families, immigrants, and longtime locals who found comfort in the traditions of the church. For years, the two congregations lived side by side, cordial, respectful, occasionally cooperative, yet undeniably divided. People didn't talk about the division out loud, but everyone felt it. Disagreements about theology, quiet judgments whispered after Sunday services, old wounds that no one named anymore, yet still shaped the way people looked at each other across grocery store aisles. And into that unspoken tension came the statue. When St. Bridget's Parish announced they were donating a marble statue of the Virgin Mary to Evergreen Park, a public, neutral space, the idea was meant as a gesture of peace, a gift to the whole town, a symbol of comfort under the old oak tree. But not everyone saw it that way. Some of Pastor Daniel's more rigid members murmured disapproval the moment the news reached them. They worried children might misunderstand the statue. They claimed it blurred theological boundaries. A few vented loudly enough to spark small waves of suspicion. Why here of all places? Are they trying to make the park Catholic? Is this the first step toward something bigger? Pastor Daniel tried to soften the unease. He reminded his congregation that the park belonged to everyone, that kindness mattered more than suspicion, and that no statue, Catholic or otherwise, should threaten anyone's faith. But the more he reassured them, the more some people questioned his neutrality. Rumors started drifting through the church halls like dust in an unused room. He's too soft on them. He's letting the Catholics take space. He's not protecting our tradition the way a pastor should. And whether he meant to or not, Daniel fed those rumors each time he fell silent, each time he avoided conflict, and especially each time he looked at that statue with an emotion he could not name. Hannah noticed those looks. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, when Father Antonio blessed the statue, Daniel stood at the back of the crowd, hands folded, expression strangely distant. His eyes lingered on the Virgin Mary with a quiet intensity, not hostility, not approval, but something deeper, something older, something Hannah didn't understand. And because she couldn't understand it, she feared it. In school, the statue became a running joke. Teenagers mocked the Catholics who stopped to pray after morning jogs. They whispered that Pastor Daniel was letting the Catholics win. Hannah laughed along with them, but her laughter was tight, brittle, and hollow. Inside her heart, a quiet storm gathered, slowly, silently. The statue had not created the division in Maple Creek. It had only revealed it. And for Hannah Miller, that silent fault line was about to become the center of her world, in ways she could never imagine. In the days after the statue's installation, something subtle began shifting inside Hannah Miller, long before her hands ever touched a can of paint. She couldn't explain it, not even to herself. It was like a knot tightening slowly in her chest, one loop added after another, until breathing felt heavier than it should. For as long as she could remember, her world had been built on one steady foundation: her father. Pastor Daniel Miller wasn't just her parent. He was the moral compass of Maple Creek, the man everyone trusted, the voice people turned to in times of crisis. And to Hannah, he was the safest place she knew. But lately, that safety felt fragile. At school, the whispers started small. A joke here, a smirk there. Comments tossed casually in hallways where teenagers love drama more than truth. "So your dad's okay with Catholics taking over the park? I thought Protestants didn't do statues. Isn't that idol worship or something?" Hannah would force a laugh, pretending none of it mattered. But every remark felt like a needle piercing straight through her ribs. She used to feel proud being the pastor's daughter. Suddenly, she felt exposed, like everyone was watching her, waiting for her reaction. Worse still was what she saw at home. Her father had always been steady, predictable in the comforting way good pastors are. Yet when he stood near the Virgin Mary statue at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, something had flickered in his eyes. Something she had never seen before. Soft, contemplative, almost emotional. It terrified her. Not because the emotion was wrong, but because she didn't understand it. Whenever Hannah tried to ask him how he felt about the statue, he would speak gently but vaguely, choosing words that avoided the center of the question. When some of his stricter church members complained loudly about the statue being unbiblical, his quiet expression, hurt but restrained, confused her even more. Why wouldn't he stand firm? Why wouldn't he defend the church the way everyone expected him to? Why did he look at that statue with softness? In Hannah's mind, the Virgin Mary began to blur from a marble figure into something symbolic, something threatening, a wedge driving between her and her father, a reminder that things she thought were solid might be shifting beneath her feet. The more she tried to ignore the feeling, the heavier it pressed. At night, she lay awake staring at her ceiling, replaying the same thoughts. What if Dad is changing? What if people stop respecting him? What if they stop respecting us? What if the Catholics think he's weak? What if the Protestants think he's compromised? Fear, misunderstood and unnamed, can often disguise itself as conviction. And in Hannah's case, fear took on the shape of certainty. Certainty that something was slipping out of control. Certainty that someone had to protect her father's reputation. Certainty that the statue represented everything she didn't know how to deal with. Whenever she passed the park on the bus, she would avert her gaze, yet somehow always notice the figure of Virgin Mary standing beneath the oak tree. The gentle face, the folded hands, the calm posture. It all unsettled Hannah in ways she couldn't articulate. Mary wasn't angry. Mary wasn't imposing. Mary simply was. And that quiet presence felt stronger than any argument Hannah could muster. Her friends joked about Catholics kneeling in front of the statue after morning jogs. Hannah joined in, but each time she laughed, she felt something in her chest crack a little more. Because deep down, she wasn't laughing at them. She was laughing to drown out her own confusion. By the time rumors reached her that her father was getting soft, the knot inside Hannah had tightened so fiercely that she no longer recognized her own thoughts. She began to see the statue not as a symbol of peace, but as a threat, a challenge, a warning that her secure world was about to collapse. And when fear reaches a breaking point, sometimes it disguises itself as action. Hannah didn't know it yet, but the storm building inside her was heading toward a single, irreversible moment, one that would shake her life, her family, and her entire town to its core. Thursday morning in Evergreen Park arrived the way most Midwestern mornings do. Calm, slow, washed in a warm summer light that made everything look harmless. Dew still clung to the grass. Joggers traced their familiar loops. Two mothers pushed strollers along the path that curved past the old oak. For a few precious minutes, Maple Creek felt like a postcard. Then Hannah Miller stepped into the clearing. No one thought twice at first. Teenagers walked across the park all the time, sometimes cutting through to reach the bus stop on Jefferson Street. But there was something about Hannah's posture, rigid shoulders, clenched jaw, the way she carried her backpack with both arms, that made a few people glance twice. Among them was Mrs. Rosa Delgado. Every morning, the 72-year-old widow came to this exact clearing to pray her rosary on the same bench facing the statue of Virgin Mary. Her husband had died 2 years earlier, and praying beneath the oak brought her comfort she couldn't find anywhere else. She recognized Hannah immediately. Everyone did. Pastor Daniel's daughter had grown up in this park, riding bikes and chasing fireflies through the trees. Rosa smiled softly, expecting the girl to wave. Hannah didn't. Her eyes darted around the clearing, searching, calculating, afraid. A faint uneasiness crept into Rosa's chest. Hannah reached the statue, dropped her backpack, and knelt. Not in prayer, but in urgency. She tugged at the zipper with trembling fingers. The metallic rasp of it sliced through the morning quiet. A jogger slowed, staring. A father pushing a stroller paused mid-step. A teenage boy pulled out one earbud. Rosa leaned forward. "Hannah?" she called gently, but Hannah didn't seem to hear. Her hand emerged from the backpack, gripping a 1-gallon can of bright red paint. Rosa's heart lurched. "Hannah, sweetheart, what are you doing?" Her voice wavered, fragile with alarm. The clearing fell silent, as if the whole park inhaled at once. Hannah's breath came fast and shallow. Her face was pale, almost sickly. For a split second, she looked like she might drop the can and run. But something, fear, pride, pressure, confusion, flickered across her eyes and hardened her expression. She placed the can on the ground and jammed a metal key beneath the lid. The sharp pop of the paint lid snapping open cut through the air. The smell hit first. Chemical, sharp, unmistakable. Gasps erupted around the clearing. "Hannah, no!" Rosa whispered, rising from the bench, rosary clutched tightly in her hand. But her feet seemed rooted to the ground. The girl she had watched grow up suddenly looked like a stranger. Hannah lifted the can. Her hands shook violently, but she kept her grip. And then, in one desperate motion that seemed to rip something open inside her, she hurled the paint. Time fractured. A crimson wave splashed across Virgin Mary's face. Streams of red poured down the marble cheeks, dripped over the delicate hands folded in prayer, and streaked the white robe in jagged, violent patterns that looked too much like blood. The sunlight caught the wet paint, making it glow a gruesome, living scarlet. A child nearby screamed. The father with the stroller stumbled backward. The jogger cursed under his breath. Rosa's knees buckled. She clasped her rosary against her heart, tears spilling before she could stop them. "Hannah, why?" she cried into the stunned silence. The teenage boy fumbled for his phone. Another woman whispered, "Is that Pastor Miller's daughter?" Voices broke into sharp whispers, then outrage. Hannah staggered back as if struck by her own action. Her breath trembled. Panic spread across her face. Real, raw, unmistakable. Then she turned, and she ran. Across the grass, past the gazebo, toward the park entrance, her footsteps pounding like a heartbeat out of control. Behind her, the Virgin Mary stood drenched in red, the marble wounded, the community shattered. And as Rosa sank onto the bench in shock, one thought rang through her mind. This wasn't just vandalism. This was the breaking of something deep, delicate, and long ignored. News of the vandalism reached the Miller house faster than the sirens ever could. By the time Pastor Daniel Miller stepped through his front door late that afternoon, Maple Creek had already exploded. His phone vibrated nonstop. Missed calls, angry messages, warnings, questions, accusations. Outside, the summer sun still glowed softly over the quiet street. But inside the house, the air felt thick and electric, like the moment before a tornado touches down. Hannah was upstairs. The door to her room was closed. The silence behind it was unnerving. Pastor Daniel paused in the entryway, setting his keys down with a hand that shook more than he wanted to admit. He had spent hours trying to calm outraged community leaders, promising cooperation, urging patience, attempting futilely to shield his daughter. But in every face he spoke to, he had seen the same stunned disappointment. "Your daughter did this? Do you realize what this means for our church?" "Daniel, the Catholics are devastated. People are crying." Every word had chipped away at him, little by little. He took a slow breath, as if gathering courage from the floorboards, and climbed the stairs. Upstairs, behind her locked bedroom door, Hannah Miller sat on the edge of her bed, gulping for air she couldn't quite catch. Her hands were red, not bright like the wet paint had been, but stained. A deep, stubborn shadow that clung to her skin, no matter how many times she scrubbed. The bathroom sink was still running. The soap bottle lay on its side. A damp towel, streaked pink, was crumpled on the tile floor. Her arms burned from scrubbing. Her knuckles were raw, but the stain remained. No matter how much she washed, the red wouldn't leave her. Downstairs, Daniel reached the top step and hesitated. He knew that behind the door was the girl he raised, the child he prayed over, the daughter who had once cried on his shoulder during thunderstorms. And now she was the center of a storm so fierce he wasn't sure he could shield either of them from it. "Hannah," he said softly, knocking once. Silence. Then the faintest tremor of breath on the other side. "Hannah, we need to talk." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push the door. He simply waited. And finally, after a long, cracking pause, the latch clicked. The door opened just enough to reveal her face, pale, streaked with tears, eyes too old for her 17 years. When he saw her hands, raw, pink, stained, his heart broke. "Oh, sweetheart." The tenderness in his voice made her flinch. Anger she had been holding back cracked open. "I didn't mean, Dad, they were saying things about you. About us. They said you were letting them take over. They were laughing. They said you were weak." Daniel closed his eyes, not in frustration, but in grief. "So you thought hurting them would protect me?" Her lips trembled. She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't have an answer. He stepped inside, lowering himself into the small wooden chair he often used when praying late at night. His Bible lay open on the table beside it, as if waiting for clarity that hadn't come. "Hannah," he said gently, "faith isn't defended with violence, or humiliation, or fear." She swallowed hard, clinging to the doorframe as though the house itself were tilted. "They worship statues," she snapped softly. "Isn't that wrong? Isn't that what we've always believed?" Daniel's face tightened, not with judgment, but with the weight of a secret he had carried far too long. Something flickered in his eyes, the same flicker Hannah had seen near the statue weeks before. "You don't know the whole story," he whispered. "Then tell me," she pleaded, voice breaking. "Stop hiding things from me." But he didn't answer. Not yet. Fear, old and familiar, held his tongue. And that silence, more than the paint, more than the shouts, more than the scandal, became the spark that would drive Hannah deeper into the storm she had unknowingly unleashed. In the dim light of that quiet hallway, father and daughter stood inches apart, yet separated by years of unspoken truth. And the stain on Hannah's hands refused to fade. That night, the Miller house felt unnaturally still, a stillness so heavy it pressed against the walls. Hannah lay awake long after the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Maple Creek, replaying the vandalism like a broken reel. Every time she blinked, she saw red paint dripping down the marble cheeks of Virgin Mary, dripping like guilt she couldn't scrub away. Even the house seemed to know something had shifted. Even the shadows looked different. She rolled over, burying her face in her pillow, wishing the world would stop spinning. But the moment she closed her eyes, she heard it. Soft, faint, almost imagined. A whisper. Her name. "Hannah." Her eyelids flew open. The room was empty. The hallway outside silent. Yet something invisible lingered in the air. A warmth, gentle and strange, brushing against her skin like a breath. Then came the fragrance. It drifted into the room slowly, like someone cracking open a door in a rose garden. Sweet, soft, impossible to ignore. The Miller household didn't keep flowers. Her mother had disliked them. And since her passing, Daniel hadn't brought any into the home. But the scent grew stronger, curling around Hannah like invisible arms. She sat up, trembling. "Dad," she whispered. No answer. She looked at her right hand, the same hand she had dipped into red paint when trying to wipe a splatter from her cheek. Even after hours of washing, a faint crimson shadow still clung to her skin. She rubbed at it desperately, nails scratching, tears burning. The stain didn't move. Her breath hitched. Panic cracked something open inside her. She stumbled to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and began scrubbing again. The water turned pink. Her skin reddened. Pain flashed across her knuckles. Still, the stain refused to disappear. "What's happening to me?" she choked. The words barely left her lips before another wave of dizziness crashed over her. The room tilted. Her legs buckled. Within seconds, she crashed to the bathroom floor, heat roaring through her body. The fever struck fast, like fire beneath her skin. Downstairs, Pastor Daniel heard the thud, a sound no parent forgets. He raced upstairs, calling her name, voice cracking with fear. When he found her curled on the tile, her skin burning, her breath sharp and shallow, his world narrowed to a single desperate plea. "Lord, please." He carried her to bed, pressed a cool cloth to her forehead, dialed the doctor, whispered prayers he had not spoken in years. But Hannah was already drifting away, into something dark and yet strangely bright. Darkness surrounded her at first, soft, weightless. Then a silver-blue glow began to bloom around her ankles, like moonlight rising from the ground. She blinked and the darkness dissolved into a place she knew too well, Evergreen Park, but not as it was. The sky shimmered with an otherworldly glow. The grass looked dewy, though she sensed no cold. The oak tree stood tall, branches glistening with soft blue light, and the Virgin Mary statue, once stained with red, now gleamed pure white, untouched, radiant. Hannah took a breath and felt something loosen inside her chest. Then she saw her. Standing just to the right of the statue was a woman in a deep blue veil, light glowing softly around her like dawn forming its first halo. Her face was gentle, her eyes, ancient with sorrow yet overwhelmingly tender, as if she had watched Hannah her entire life. The woman said nothing. She didn't need to. Hannah felt the meaning in her heart, warm, heavy, breaking her open from the inside. Compassion, ache, love. Her knees hit the ground, tears spilled freely, tears she had swallowed for years. I didn't mean. Her voice fractured. The woman stepped closer, though her feet didn't seem to touch the ground. A warmth wrapped around Hannah, not a touch, but an embrace made of air and light. And then without sound, a message blossomed inside her chest, a message she felt more than heard. You are loved. The words filled her, lifted her, healed her. When she gasped awake, the fever was gone. Her room was dark, but the scent of roses lingered, soft as a kiss. Downstairs, Pastor Daniel froze when he heard her whisper. She was there. And in that moment, he knew the past he'd buried for decades had returned. Pastor Daniel Miller stood frozen in the doorway of his daughter's room. The words "she was there" still hanging in the air like a fragile thread connecting past and present. Hannah sat upright, trembling, her skin pale from the fever that had vanished as suddenly as it came. The scent of roses, soft, unmistakable, lingered in the room, drifting between them as if someone invisible had just left. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. For nearly 20 years, he had tried to bury the memory that scent carried with it. He moved slowly, sitting at the edge of Hannah's bed. She clutched her blanket, eyes wide, searching his face for answer he wasn't sure he was ready to give. Dad, her voice cracked. What's happening to me? Daniel swallowed hard. His fingers trembled slightly as he laced them together. He looked older than he had hours earlier, like a man forced to reopen a wound time had never fully healed. There's something, he said softly, I never told you. Something I never told anyone. Hannah's heartbeat quickened. Daniel stared at the floor, gathering words that had lived in silence far too long. I was 21, he began, voice low and steady, still in seminary, still questioning where I belonged. I wasn't the man people see today. I was uncertain, afraid of disappointing God, afraid of disappointing myself. He took a long breath. One winter night, I drove home from visiting a friend outside town. The roads were icy. The wind howled through the trees. I remember thinking the world felt too big for me, too cold. His eyes grew distant, fixed on something only he could see. A deer ran across the road. I swerved. The car slid off the embankment, rolled twice. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. When everything stopped, he continued, I was upside down in the ravine, my legs pinned, blood running into my eyes, snow blowing through the broken window. My phone was thrown somewhere I couldn't reach. I thought it was the end. The room felt smaller, as if leaning in with Hannah, listening. And then, Daniel whispered, I saw her. The air inside the bedroom shifted. Hannah's breath hitched. A woman in blue, he said, voice breaking, standing just outside the car. The snow didn't touch her. The wind didn't move her. But she looked at me with the gentlest eyes I'd ever seen, as if she'd known me since the day I was born. Tears glistened in Hannah's eyes. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't move. But the moment she looked at me, I felt warmth spread through my body. The pain stopped. The fear stopped. And then I could move my legs again. He paused before delivering the part that still haunted him. I crawled out of the car. I remember turning back, wanting to thank her. His voice collapsed into a whisper. But she was gone. A full minute passed before he continued. A few seconds later, the car exploded behind me. Hannah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, struggling to steady his voice. I knew who she was. I knew immediately. I didn't understand it. I didn't know why she came. But I knew it was her. It was the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. He looked at Hannah with a gaze that carried both fear and release. When I told my pastor at the time, he warned me not to speak about it, said it would confuse the congregation, cause division, so I buried it. I tried to pretend it didn't happen, but I never forgot. Hannah's lips quivered. Dad, the woman I saw, she looked at me the same way. Daniel exhaled shakily, as if a secret that had weighed on him for decades was finally painfully lifting. Then she came for both of us, he whispered, and I think she's not done yet. 595 words. Sleep did not return to the Miller house that night. The revelation Pastor Daniel had carried in silence for 2 decades lay open in the room like a fragile, glowing wound. Hannah sat for a long time after he finished speaking, hands pressed to her chest, trying to comprehend a truth bigger than the world she had known. But even as her father's story echoed in her mind, something else stirred within her, gentle, persistent, unmistakably calling. It began with the scent. The faint perfume of roses drifted down the hallway, long after Daniel kissed her forehead and stepped out of the room. It came softly at first, then lingered, weaving through the dark like a whisper too warm to ignore. Hannah's heart tightened, not with fear, but with a strange, aching desire to follow it. She rose from her bed, slipped on a hoodie and sneakers, and crept down the stairs. The house felt almost suspended, as though every shadow was watching, waiting. When she opened the front door, a warm summer breeze brushed across her face, carrying with it the same fragrance that had visited her fever dream. The roses led her, down the quiet street, past the flickering porch lights, through the hush of sleeping Maple Creek, and toward Evergreen Park. By the time Hannah reached the entrance, the moon hung low above the oak trees, bathing the paths in silver. The park, usually filled with chatter and laughter, felt like sacred ground, still, expectant, almost alive. She followed the stone path until the trees opened into the familiar clearing, and stopped. From a distance, she could see the red paint dried dark against the marble of the Virgin Mary statue, ugly, jagged streaks that clung like dried blood. The sight broke her anew. Her throat tightened. Shame crawled up her spine. But then, something shifted. A soft shimmer glowed around the statue. Not bright, not blinding, just enough to make the air look like it was breathing. Hannah took a step forward, then another. The glow strengthened, and slowly, impossibly, the dried paint began to loosen. Thin cracks formed along the hardened red streaks. The lines crumbled like ash touched by a rising sun. Color drew back from the marble as if pulled by invisible hands. One streak dissolved, then another. The robe brightened. The hands regained their pale glow. The face emerged clean, serene, untouched. Within seconds, every last stain had vanished. Hannah gasped, falling to her knees. The statue stood restored, radiant in the moonlight. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The scent of roses intensified until the air felt thick with sweetness. A warm breeze brushed against her shoulders as if someone had knelt beside her, offering comfort. Then she felt it, a presence, not a figure she could fully see, not a voice she could hear with her ears, but a nearness, holy, tender, inviting. Her breath shook. She lifted her trembling hands, once smeared by sin and guilt, and froze. The faint red stain she had scrubbed until her skin burned was fading. Right before her eyes, the stubborn shadow melted away. The pinkness softened. The skin brightened. In mere seconds, both hands were completely clean, smooth, unblemished, as though the paint had never touched her. A sob escaped her chest. Relief washed over her like warm rain. This wasn't imagination, not fever, not stress. It was mercy. Pure, undeserved mercy. The kind that reaches deeper than guilt. The kind that restores more than marble. The kind that finds the lost and washes them clean. Under the silver-blue moonlight, Hannah remained kneeling, breathing, trembling, forgiven, while the presence surrounding her whispered without words, "Grace is real, and you were never beyond it." Morning broke over Maple Creek with a strange, humming quiet, one that didn't feel like dawn, but like the pause before a revelation. By 7 a.m., whispers had already spread through every neighborhood. The paint is gone. The statue looks brand new. Someone said it happened overnight. Curiosity pulled people toward Evergreen Park faster than any church bell ever had. By the time the sun climbed above the oak branches, the clearing was crowded with families, teenagers, retirees, and members from both congregations who normally kept to opposite sides of Sunday mornings. They stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the statue of Virgin Mary glowing softly in the morning light, pristine, spotless, and impossibly unmarred. Not even a pink shadow remained where the paint had once clung. Father Antonio arrived first, rosary in hand, his breath catching when he saw the untouched marble. Minutes later, Pastor Daniel stepped through the crowd, shock mingled with something like awe pressing into every line of his face. And then someone murmured, a whisper that rippled out like a wave. "She's here!" All eyes turned. Hannah Miller stood at the edge of the clearing beside her father. She looked smaller than she had days earlier, shoulders soft, eyes humble, hands clean. Clean in a way no soap or scrubbing could have produced. Pastor Daniel gave her a small, steady nod. Hannah stepped forward. Every conversation in the park went silent. She approached the statue slowly, as if walking through the last remnants of a storm. When she reached the base of the marble pedestal, she dropped to her knees. Her voice, when it finally emerged, trembled but carried, "I need to say something." Dozens leaned in. No one breathed. "Yesterday, I hurt people." Tears welled in her eyes. "I hurt this town. I hurt my friends. I hurt those who never did anything to me. And I hurt the mother of Jesus." A few gasps broke through the crowd. Even some of the hardest hearts flinched. "I acted out of fear," she continued. "I was confused. I thought I was defending something, but really, I was running from what I didn't understand, and I let fear turn into anger." Behind her, Pastor Daniel closed his eyes, fighting emotion. Hannah clasped her hands, voice cracking. "I'm sorry, deeply, truly sorry, to every person here, to this community, and to her." For a moment, the world stood still. Then an unexpected movement. Mrs. Rosa Delgado pushed through the front of the crowd. The elderly woman, who had watched the vandalism with her own trembling eyes, leaned down and wrapped her arms around Hannah. No anger, no bitterness, just forgiveness. Something broke open in the clearing. A man from Pastor Daniel's church stepped forward. Then a woman from St. Bridget's. Then a teenager holding a skateboard. One by one, hands touched Hannah's shoulders, offering warmth, unity, mercy. The line between Protestant and Catholic dissolved like the paint had the night before. Father Antonio placed his hand over his heart in a gesture of peace. Pastor Daniel mirrored him, then stepped beside the priest, a sight Maple Creek had never witnessed. Together, they faced the community. Pastor Daniel spoke first. "For years, I thought the wall between our churches kept us safe," he said, voice thick with humility. "But I was wrong. Sometimes those walls keep us from seeing the love God is trying to give." Father Antonio added gently, "And sometimes God speaks loudest when we are most broken." Heads bowed, hearts softened. The two leaders invited the crowd to pray. Not in uniform words, not in perfect harmony, but in one shared spirit. And as their voices rose, a warm breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of roses. People wept openly. Some fell to their knees. All felt something change. In the days that followed, Maple Creek would talk about this moment, not as a scandal, but as the birth of something new. A gentler town, a united town, a town touched by grace. And at the center of it all was a girl who once brought division and now carried a new legacy of faith. If this story touched you today, subscribe to Touched by Light for more true, powerful, and miraculous encounters just like this one.